You're listening to Insight here on CapRadio, and if you're just joining us, we're talking about Governor Newsom and Democratic lawmakers' mid-cycle redistricting push to combat Texas Republicans who are working to gain an advantage in the 2026 midterms. I now want to bring in Omar Noureldin with the government watchdog group Common Cause, which has walked back its opposition to California's redistricting push. Welcome.
Hi, Vicky. Thanks for having me.
So for those who are unfamiliar, what is the mission of Common Cause?
Common Cause's mission is to uphold the values of American democracy and ensure that people, not politicians, hold the power in our democratic and political processes.
So this watchdog group supports election reform, independent redistricting, is a national redistricting leader, and initially Common Cause was strongly opposed to what was unfolding in both Texas and California. Can you walk us through the evolution of this organization's position in a relatively short amount of time, within the span of a month or so?
Sure. This story starts with Texas. At the direction of Donald Trump, Texan Republican leaders are redrawing congressional maps mid-decade, which is outside the normal 10-year cycle prompted by the census, which is required by the Constitution, to basically squeeze out 5 more Republican seats for the president. And to be clear, Texan Republican leaders initially did not want to engage in a mid-decade redistricting until President Trump kind of put his finger on the scale and put the Justice Department at work here. And what we see is this is an authoritarian-style power grab designed to silence dissent and distort the 2026 midterm elections before voters can even cast a ballot. And then California stepped in. At first glance, it looked like Democrats were just doing the same thing, and Common Cause has had a long history in opposing partisan gerrymandering, regardless of which party does it. Because we believe that partisan gerrymandering, which is the process by which parties through their state legislatures in which they're in power, draw voting districts in a way that makes sure that certain candidates from their parties win. And we believe that means necessarily voters lose their political voice and political power. But then California leaders said that what they were doing was really intended to counterbalance, or in the words of the constitutional amendment, neutralize President Trump's scheme in Texas, so that Congress still can act as a check on presidential power. Because what we have seen is this Congress is not fulfilling its constitutional role in making sure that President Trump and the executive branch has some limits on its authority. And so what we're seeing in Texas is part of a larger playbook, a larger scheme, a larger set of steps that the president is taking so that he stays in power in a way where there is no one to challenge him. And so what we did is took a step back and we had to review our policy position through this lens, through the lens of the United States right now being a backsliding democracy, through the lens of us needing to fight authoritarianism. And through that lens, we evolved our policy position such that we continue not to endorse partisan gerrymandering, regardless of which party does it. But we had to shift our strategic posture such that we're devoting our resources to the most urgent threats. And that's why we set out a fairness criteria to evaluate any partisan gerrymandering done to counterbalance what President Trump and right now what Republican leaders in Texas are doing.
Okay, so how does California meet the criteria, the threshold for Common Cause, and Texas does not?
Sure. So in California, the first prong of our fairness criteria is proportionality. And I'm glad to hear the chair of the California Democratic Party adopt our language in this regard. And so Texas is not doing it in response to anything else. Texas started this whole mid-decade redistricting, partisan gerrymandering, tit-for-tat battle. And so Texas fails the first prong. And to be clear, you have to meet all 6 in order to pass. So Texas fails automatically. On the other hand, California, in the language of the constitutional amendment and the legislative bills, were requiring Texas to do something first. So there is a trigger mechanism, so to speak. So California passes that proportionality that it's being done in response to, or in other words, to counterbalance. The next is public participation. The Texas maps were drawn behind closed doors with little to no input from the communities that are going to be affected by the redrawing of these maps. On the other hand, the California plan puts the entire process and maps in the hands of California voters for an up or down vote. And so in our view, that robust back end public participation meets our criteria. Racial equity is another prong. In California, the maps that have been proposed, none of the majority minority districts or the districts where, in the language of like Voting Rights Act, Black opportunity districts or Latino majority districts, none of those districts, the total number in California is being reduced or eliminated. Whereas in Texas, the Texas maps involve breaking up communities and communities of color in order to create the Republican seats that they're trying to achieve. Next is federal reform. Leaders in California, including the governor, state legislative leaders, have endorsed provisions of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and the Freedom to Vote Act, who, if had been passed in previous Congresses, would have banned partisan gerrymandering and would have banned mid-decade redistricting. What the Texas legislative leaders and the governor are doing undermine all these safeguards. Independent redistricting. California has been the leader in independent redistricting and will go back to an independent redistricting process after this cycle, whereas in Texas, they've never had independent redistricting and there is no commitment to that in the future. So California passes all 6 of our criteria, whereas Texas, actually trying to go the other way in a game of reverse bingo, hasn't hit any of our 6 fairness criteria.
Would you go as far as an endorsement of Prop 50?
No, we are not endorsing Prop 50. Our position on partisan gerrymandering remains the same. We do not support partisan gerrymandering. What we are doing in this moment is to say that if you meet all 6 criteria, we will not oppose. There could be another state that is controlled by Democrats that do not meet our 6 fairness criteria, and we will oppose the efforts by Democrats in those states if they do not meet our 6 fairness criteria.
Okay, so even though that this is a counterbalance, as you say, so would you call what is happening in both California and Texas partisan gerrymandering?
Yes. The idea here is that California is going to try and they have redrawn their maps to add 5 more Democratic safe seats. That is partisan gerrymandering.
Is this common or unusual for Common Cause to go through an evolution like this on a stance of, I guess, not formally opposing partisan gerrymandering?
This is an evolution for our position, but one that we believe is necessary in this moment. As I mentioned at the top, we are not in normal times. These are not normal times. By metrics that, people smarter than me have created to evaluate the health of a democracy, our democracy, unfortunately, is not healthy. And so we're thinking both about the now, what do we need to do now, but also the next. What is the next thing we need to do? And in order to get to the next, we have to make sure we get through the now. And so this strategic positioning that we are saying we're not opposing these measures if they meet these 6 fairness criteria allows us to get through the now so that we can start thinking about the next. How do we rebuild our democracy such that it's working for everyone?
Omar, thank you for taking the time here on Insight.
Thank you.
Omar Noureldin is the Senior Vice President of Policy and Litigation at the government watchdog group Common Cause, which has walked back its opposition to California's retaliatory redistricting push, formerly called Prop 50, the Election Rigging Response Act. A special election has been called for November 4th. Earlier in the show, we were also joined by Rusty Hicks, chair of the California Democratic Party, which officially endorsed Prop 50. And as I mentioned, this is an ongoing conversation we'll be having on Insight. You will hear from a wide range of voices. It's also worth noting that Sarah Sadwani, a former independent commissioner who supports Prop 50, was scheduled to join today's show but canceled. You're listening to Insight on Cap Radio. I'm Vicki Gonzalez.